Before I begin, I just want to say that what we're trying to learn are generalities. We're going to learn the rules and not the exceptions. As you go through the video, there will absolutely be different times when you're going to say, hey, what about this disease? How about that disease? Sure. There are always exceptions, and that's what you learn during your residency and beyond. But where you guys are starting out, you want to learn the general rules, and then you can build on and learn the exceptions. Now let's discuss neuromuscular junction. This is actually quite complicated, so I want you to break apart the thought process for myasthenia into separate segments. First is, think about the anatomy, the nerve anatomy, the junction anatomy, and the muscle. First, you have the motor nerve that carries the signal from the spinal cord down to the neuromuscular junction. This is the junction where the motor nerve communicates with the muscle to cause it to contract. It's fairly straightforward and simple, but it's worth stating so you guys keep your orientation straight. You now have acetylcholine molecules being produced proximally and then transported down the axon to where the muscle is, where it's going to be ultimately released, which would be at the neuromuscular junction. So real quickly, what type of acetylcholine receptor are we talking about? Is it muscarinic? Is it nicotinic? What do you think? Half you guys said muscarinic. That is incorrect. It's nicotinic receptor. Test question, guys. Don't forget that one. So once it comes down to the axon terminal, the acetylcholine is exocytosed into the neuromuscular junction. Once the acetylcholine is released, it travels across the synapse and binds to the acetylcholine receptor on the muscle to initiate the actual muscle contraction. Now, once that signal has been passed on to the muscle, the acetylcholine has to be released from the receptor. It is not taken into the muscle. It does not just kind of float away, but rather it is broken down within the synapse. How is it broken down, guys? It is broken down with the chemical acetylcholinesterase. What are the byproducts of this breakdown? It's acetate and choline. Once broken down, the choline is taken up by the nerve terminal, and then it is reused to form another molecule of acetylcholine. To understand pathology, you must understand what's normal. So what we just went through here is the normal process of an axon releasing acetylcholine, stimulating the muscle, breaking down the acetylcholine, and resorption of the choline. I will not get into the underlying pathophysiology of myasthenia gravis in this video, but rather we'll just talk about the hallmark signs and symptoms of myasthenia gravis. So what do you think? What are the hallmark signs and symptoms of myasthenia gravis? Most students say you're weaker at the end of the day. That's actually incorrect. Other students say, oh, the hallmark symptoms are double vision and ptosis. Well, that can occur if your ocular muscles are involved. What if they're not involved? Then you wouldn't have those. So those are not the hallmark signs and symptoms of myasthenia gravis. So from a basic understanding standpoint, let's make one assumption. And that one assumption is that the antibodies against the acetylcholine receptor are the primary factor to cause the disease. This is not actually true, just to let you know, but for the sake of this discussion, let's assume that's the case. So if the antibodies are binding to the postsynaptic acetylcholine receptor, you have fewer receptors, which means you have fewer acetylcholine that can bind to the receptors to then cause a muscle stimulation, muscle contraction. So in trying to contract or trying to activate the muscle, as you activate it, you start to get tired and fatigue because the receptors are all used up. But think about this for a second. We just went through the normal processes, which is after it stimulates the muscle, the acetylcholine is released and the receptors open again. So if that happens, and you give it some time, and all the acetylcholine is released from the receptors, broken down and taken up by the nerve terminal again, what happens to the muscle? It now has open receptors, and it can function again and start to contract again. So when you understand that, now you can sort of kind of see what the hallmark signs and symptoms of myasthenia is. So it is fatigability, because the receptors are blocked and the acetylcholine can no longer stimulate the muscle, so you fatigue. But it's not fatiguing at the end of the day. It's fatiguing with activity. So if you lift something over and over again, you fatigue with myasthenia. But if you rest, you get stronger. So the hallmark symptoms is fatigability with activity, comma, which recovers at rest. Very important. Now, this is different from fatigability that you and I would experience when we're normal. If we go to Disney World, we're going to fatigue. But that's not because we've used up all of our acetylcholine. It's because we're just tired, because we don't have energy, we don't have sugar and glucose, and we're just exhausted. Our mitochondria is saying, please help me, give me some more energy. That is not what's happening in myasthenia. In myasthenia, the mitochondria is working fine, you have enough energy. There just aren't enough receptors to make the contraction linger. But if you give it time, they're released and you can contract again. Okay? Memorize that. Don't forget it. It's very important. As a side note, why do people get double vision? Why do people get ptosis with myasthenia? Well, because you have those small palpebral muscles contracting all the time to keep your eyelids open, they fatigue. And over time, they start to droop and cause ptosis. But if you have them close their eyes and rest for just a minute or two, now suddenly they can open their eyes bright and fully again. And the same concept holds for the extraocular muscles. They're small muscles, they're used all the time, and they fatigue very easily, and hence the diplopia. So that's the end of the hallmark discussion of myasthenia. Now let's go on to nerve. Before you start the next video, try to think about the hallmark signs and symptoms of a nerve disorder. What is a nerve disorder called? And how do you separate these disorders into different buckets? What are the major buckets you should be thinking about when you think about nerve disorders? Think about these questions, and we will see you on the next video.